Okay, well, now we'll start Chapter 7 in class problems. The first one we'll do is exercise 7-3. So this question tells us that Ramona's Clothing is a retail store specializing in women's clothing. The store has established a liberal return policy for the holiday season in order to encourage gift purchases. Any item purchased during November and December may be returned through January 31st with a receipt for cash or exchange. If the customer does not have a receipt, cash will still be refunded for any item under $75. If the item is more than $75, a check is mailed to the customer. Whenever an item is returned, a store clerk completes a return slip which the customer signs. The return slip is placed in a special box. Then the store manager visits the return counter approximately once every 2 hours to authorize the return slips. Clerks are instructed to place the returned merchandise on the proper rack on the selling floor as soon as possible. This year, returns at Ramona's Clothing have reached an all-time high. There are a large number of returns under $75 without receipts. So question A says, how can sales clerks employed at Ramona's Clothing use the store's return policy to steal money from the cash register? So if we look at the given information, it tells us that the store clerk completes a return slip, the customer signs it, it's placed in a special box, and then the store manager visits the return counter approximately once every 2 hours to authorize the return slips. However, it also tells us that if any item is under $75, cash will be refunded at the time of the return. So the clerks are responsible for both initiating the return slip and handing out the cash for any return that's under $75. So what they could do is write phony refunds and pocket the cash for any returns under $75. So they could steal money by writing phony refunds and pocketing the cash. So although it has to be under $75, that can add up very quickly if they do it multiple times. Okay, part B, what internal control weaknesses do you see in the return policy that makes cash thefts easier? So one thing is that the clerk is both preparing the return slip and handing out the cash. So that tells me that there's not segregation of duties. We should have multiple people doing the recording of the cash and then the actual distribution of the cash, because in that case there would have to be collusion between those two employees in order for the theft of cash to occur. So the first thing is inadequate separation or segregation of duties. And then the second thing is that there doesn't have to be proof of the return, so we don't have to match up the actual item with a return slip or something like that, or there's not security over those clerks preparing the returns. Okay, part C. Would issuing a store credit in place of a cash refund for all merchandise returned without a receipt reduce the possibility of theft? Yes. Employees are less likely to want store credit than cash. They can use cash anywhere. Store credit they can only use in that store. So if it's in-store credit, it's less likely that they'll want that. All right, part D, we want to classify the following as either advantages or disadvantages of issuing a store credit in place of cash. So the first one, a clerk could only issue a phony store credit rather than taking money from the cash register. That would be an advantage. Because cash can be used for anything, anywhere, whereas store credit can only be used in that store. Okay, number 2, the store would lose less revenue if customers had to choose other store merchandise instead of getting a cash refund. That would be an advantage. if somebody returns something and they get store credit, they're going to have to use it in that store. If they get cash, they can go buy something else from a different store. So instead of giving them the opportunity to spend that money elsewhere, they have to keep it within that store. The third one, issuing only a store credit for returns without a receipt, is a stricter return policy that may affect gift givers' purchase decisions. That would be a disadvantage. So gift givers may look at the return policy and go elsewhere if they have a high belief that the gift they're purchasing will be returned. So they may buy from other stores. All right, and the fourth one, sales clerks will need to be trained to apply the new policy and write up a store credit. They will also need to be trained to handle the redemption of the store credit on future merchandise purchases. So that's a disadvantage because we're going to have to train our employees to handle this new situation. And we know training takes time and therefore it costs money. Okay, and the last part, Part E. So assume that Ramona's Clothing is committed to the current policy of issuing cash refunds without a receipt. Are there any changes that could be made in the store's procedures regarding customer refunds in order that would improve internal control? Yes, of course, we can always improve things. We can involve management intervention. So this would be kind of like a segregation of duties. And we can have electronic monitoring. So if we see that one sales clerk is issuing way more refunds under $75 than another, that would raise a red flag to check out what that employee is doing. So this one, an example would be the cash refund could need to be approved by a manager before it is given to the customer. You see this lots of times in stores. The manager has to come over, put in their code in order for the return to be processed.